I'm 29, male, and I've always been the type to work hard and save. Growing up, my parents instilled this in me. You can't rely on anyone but yourself, my father used to say. I took it to heart. By the time I was 18, I was juggling college classes and 2 part-time jobs, putting every spare dollar into a savings account. That savings account was my safety net, my future, a house, a business, maybe a family someday. Little did I know, my parents saw it as something else entirely, their retirement fund. The day it all unraveled started out innocently enough. I'd driven to my parents' house to drop off some papers they needed signed for a refinance on their mortgage. My father was unusually cheerful, which should have been my first clue. My mother made me coffee, something she hadn't done in years. "Come sit," she said, motioning to the worn-out couch. "We've got something exciting to tell you." I settled in, already wary of her tone. "We decided to retire early," my father announced, grinning ear to ear. "That's great," I said, though I was confused. My parents didn't have much in savings, and their house was still underwater from a second mortgage they'd taken out a few years ago. My mother leaned forward, her smile tightening. "Well, we wouldn't have been able to do it without your help." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "We've been using your savings," my father said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My stomach sank. "What?" My mother waved a hand, dismissive. "Oh, don't overreact. It's not like you needed it right now. And honestly, it's for the family. We raised you. It's the least you could do to give back." I was speechless. My savings account, which I'd meticulously built over the last decade, had over $120,000 in it. It was supposed to be untouchable. "How?" I finally managed to choke out. "Well, you gave us access to your account when you were 19 to help with that car insurance issue," my father said. "We never got around to removing ourselves from it." I remembered that vaguely, a rushed visit to the bank to sort out some paperwork. But I never imagined they'd exploit it like this. "I didn't give you permission to touch that money," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't say we couldn't either," my mother shot back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stood up, pacing the living room, trying to make sense of it. "So, you just drained my account?" "Not drained," my father corrected, as if that made it better. "There's still a little left." "How much?" "About $2,000, my mother said nonchalantly. "It's enough for emergencies." My jaw tightened. "That was my money. You had no right." "Don't be dramatic," my father snapped. "We're your parents. We've sacrificed everything for you. The least you can do is help us live comfortably." I could feel my blood boiling. "That money wasn't for you. It was for my future." "And what about our future?" my mother countered. "We're family, and family helps each other. You'll understand one day when you have kids." This wasn't help. This was theft. I grabbed my phone and called my bank right there in front of them. They tried to talk over me, but I ignored them, speaking to a customer service representative to freeze the account. "What are you doing?" my father asked, his voice rising. "Fixing this," I said. My mother scoffed. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You're not going to sue your own parents. That's just embarrassing." That's when I realized they thought I wouldn't do anything, that I'd just roll over and accept it. They were wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pored over bank statements, piecing together exactly how much they had taken and when. It turned out they'd been dipping into my account for years, transferring small amounts here and there to avoid suspicion. It wasn't just for their retirement. They'd used it to pay off credit cards, go on vacations, and even buy a new car. The next morning, I went straight to a lawyer. I laid everything out, how they'd gained access to my account, how they'd abused my trust, and how much they'd taken. The lawyer's face grew grim as I spoke. "This is a clear case of theft," he said. "Even though they're your parents, the law is on your side." Over the next few weeks, I filed a police report and initiated legal proceedings. My parents, predictably, didn't take it well. "You're ruining this family," my mother screamed over the phone. "No, you did that the moment you stole from me," I shot back. The next day, I got a call from my aunt, who'd clearly been fed a skewed version of events. "Can't you just forgive them? They're your parents," she pleaded. "Would you forgive someone who stole $120,000 from you?" I asked. She had no response. My parents didn't stop at guilt trips, though. They tried to turn the family against me. painting me as ungrateful and greedy. They even showed up at my apartment one night, banging on the door and demanding to talk. I refused to let them in and called the police when they wouldn't leave. But the final straw came a week later, when I discovered they'd started spreading rumors at my workplace, claiming I was unstable and a danger to others. That's when I knew I couldn't just fight back. I needed to make sure they faced real consequences. The court case was brutal. My parents hired a lawyer and tried to argue that the money was a family fund and that I'd always intended for them to use it. But the evidence was overwhelming. I had meticulous records showing every unauthorized transfer they'd made. During the trial, my mother cried on the stand, playing the victim. "We only took what we needed to survive," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Is that why you went to Hawaii last year?" my lawyer asked, holding up a copy of their credit card statement. The courtroom went silent. My father tried a different tactic, accusing me of being a selfish, ungrateful child who didn't understand the sacrifices they'd made. But the judge didn't buy it. In the end, they were found guilty of theft and ordered to pay back every cent they'd taken, plus damages. Their retirement dream was shattered. They had to sell their house and move into a tiny apartment to make the payments. After the trial, I thought it was over. I'd won, and they'd gotten what they deserved. But they weren't done yet. A week after the judgment, I got a call from my bank. Someone had tried to access my account using forged documents. My parents were desperate enough to commit fraud. I immediately contacted my lawyer and filed another report. This time, they weren't just facing financial consequences. They were facing jail time. When the police came to arrest them, my mother screamed at the officers, calling me every name in the book. My father just glared at me as they were led away in handcuffs. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was drowned out by relief. They crossed every line, and now they were paying for it. The legal process for the fraud case took months, but eventually they were convicted. My father got a year in jail. My mother got 6 months with probation. By the time they were released, they were pariahs. None of the family members they'd tried to manipulate wanted anything to do with them anymore. I went no contact, no phone calls, no letters, nothing. They tried a few times to reach out, sending emails apologizing, or rather, justifying their actions, but I deleted them without reading. In the end, I rebuilt my life. It wasn't easy. Recovering financially took years, but the emotional toll was harder. How do you come to terms with the fact that the people who raised you could betray you so deeply? I channeled my anger into something constructive. I started a side business offering financial literacy workshops for young adults, teaching them how to protect their savings and avoid the mistakes I made. If nothing else, I wanted to make sure no one else fell victim to the kind of entitlement and manipulation I experienced. Looking back, I don't regret taking them to court. If I hadn't, they would have gotten away with it. And worse, they would have continued to believe they were entitled to my hard-earned money. Standing up for myself was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most empowering. If you enjoyed this wild ride of family drama and karma served cold, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you don't want to miss the next story. Things are only getting crazier from here.